Meine
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests here in the hall, but also at the screens, I would like to welcome you to this year's Berlin Foreign Policy Forum on behalf of Körber-Stiftung. I'm happy that you're all here and that you were able to adjust from 10 to 9, the short-term shift. Foreign Minister Baerbock, I'm delighted that you're here today with us today. Mr. Landsbergis, Foreign Minister, I'm also delighted to welcome you here in Berlin. It's a special honor for us that you're opening this year's Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, the year 2023 is, and you have to say it again, a year of crisis. War, terrorism, flight and dispersion, climate catastrophes, humanitarian crises, the list can be extended. In a world of conflict that is coming to a part, is more or less on fire, the temptation might be to withdraw and sit out the crisis. And can we just not see it through? There's enough domestic challenges that demand our attention. However, ladies and gentlemen, such a position would be fatal. Because if history has taught us one thing, then is that doing nothing is looking away is not an option. At some point, the crisis will catch up with you. So, and we as a modern society, there's trade, integration, capital chains, and migration, etc. We're just too much interwoven with others than that we could just put up some walls. So home, sweet home, in foreign policy is just not possible. So many of you might say, okay, well, there's also not new findings that you're telling us about. That's fair enough. However, that's why it's so remarkable that a majority of the Germans would still like to see a cautious foreign policy in international crises. And this is also illustrated by this year's the Berlin Pulse survey. 54% of the respondents in Germany are against more commitment of Germany in international crises. So since we've been doing these surveys, this opinion has not really changed much. However, you could also read it the other way around. Nearly half of the Germans do agree that Germany should be involved and committed more in international crisis. So whatever side you look at it from, I'm convinced that policy at the end of the day will have some scope in foreign policy. So it can convince people that we shouldn't put the head into the sand, but we should also explain time and again, not beat about the bush and name other names. So politics need to be clear and also need to take over leadership. Next point. Foreign policy does not take place in a vacuum. There's more than that, than the support by the own population. So we need a lively and defensive democracy, functioning infrastructure, and an army that works. Soft power and hard power are interlinked more and more. Both are prerequisite that Germany can move something in this world. So there's a lot of work ahead of us so that we can live up to the political realities and crises and conflicts. So this also includes ensuring the Bundeswehr is fit for war. And this is what the Germans also think. The survey says that a majority of the Germans are in favor of greater defense spending. Nearly half are in favor of Germany reaching the 2% NATO goal. And another quarter thinks that this expenditure is still too low. Last point. Germany is in a more and more complex, ambivalent world. Here, the liberal democracies do not have the majority. So the countries from Asia, Latin America, and Africa is increasing. The competition between China and the USA is being aggravated. And in Europe, we understand security is good that we have to earn ourselves. So the Germans are aware of these changes. In the Berlin Pulse, the respondents cite a large number of crises that are challenging Germany. There's a clear focus on a few topics, just as the previous years is not recognizable anymore. There's shifts in the global power structure, and they're open to that. So 51% of the respondents see the growing influence of countries such as Brazil, India, and South Africa in a positive light. For Germany and Europe, there's difficult questions. So how can we adapt to realities, and how can we secure the international order, and how can we better compensate and integrate the interests of the global south in our foreign policy, and how do we secure our liberal democracy at home and in Europe? So this year's forum, foreign policy, is of paradigm and power shifts, steering through a contested international order. This is the subject we're addressing. With this forum, we want to bring these debates to the public, but also not just here in this hall, but to the public, because foreign policy concerns us all. Foreign policy can only work if we all shape it together. So in other words, include all those who are also following us on our live stream. So please tell us what you think and use our hashtag Berlin, so #Berlin Forum. So, ladies and gentlemen, in 2011, the Körber Foundation founded this Berlin Foreign Policy Forum together with the Federal Foreign Office. The current crises and conflicts have strengthened our conviction that this forum is necessary more than ever. So I would like to thank the Federal Foreign Officer, the planning staff for their constructive and forward-looking cooperation. I would be happy to continue to debate on foreign policy together in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, so at this forum of foreign policy, to quote our founder, let's talk with one another instead of about one another. I wish a day of lively debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Paulsen. Dear guests, good morning. A very warm welcome also from my side. Not only to our guests here at the venue, but also to our viewers in the online streams and our participants online. We are delighted that Körber-Stiftung can welcome such a diverse crowd from more than 40 countries here in the room and more than 100 countries online. My name is Sarah Pagung. I'm a program director with Körber-Stiftung, and I'm delighted to guide you through the conference day. Throughout this conference, we not only want to discuss power and paradigm shifts with our esteemed speakers. We want to engage with you, both with our participants here in the venue and online. Many high-ranking decision makers in and experts on foreign policy will share their thoughts with us today. And we encourage you to do the same. To that end, please make use of the hashtag Berlin Forum. Those of you who know the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum know that it's a good tradition that the German foreign minister opens this day of discussion. And we're delighted and honored that Minister Baerbock follows this good tradition. Minister, the floor is yours.
Good morning, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, lieber Herr Paulsen, stellvertretend für alle hier in der Körber-Stiftung, lieber Kollege, lieber Freund Gabrielus Landsbergis. Das ist mir zu viel. Dies war der Aufschrei auf dem Tier.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Mr. Paulsen, dear friend and colleague Gabrielus Landsbergis, I'm happy to be here. This is too much for me. That was the outcry on the cover of a German weekly magazine a few weeks ago. Below, you saw a picture of a smartphone from which the crises of our time seem to be exploding. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, Hamas' terrible terror against Israel, fear and terror in Gaza, the climate crisis. Everywhere, people in unspeakable need. Yes, the crises that surround us feel too much, almost unbearable, especially at night when you watch the videos, hard to bear. And this is perhaps the reason or the feeling that many people have or make feel the urge to adopt a supposedly simple slogan, to take a one-sided stance, to ignore the suffering of others, to close themselves off to the universal view of need. We experience how conflicts that take place thousands of kilometers away from us find their way into our societies, how anger and grief turn into hate on our streets. We see all this on our streets, in our schools. We see the social media bubbles that act like echo chambers in which even Osama bin Laden is used as a key witness to a supposedly anti-colonial worldview. TikTok and Instagram are becoming spirals of self-affirmation, parallel worlds of one-sidedness. And that is convenient, after all. It's easier to isolate oneself in supposed moral purity than to engage with other opinions. In view of the pictures we see, this is understandable. You want to turn away, you want to isolate yourself instead of dealing with what others think. But this is simplification, and the danger of such simplification is polarization. Everybody has the right to state their opinion, especially in a democracy, but anti-Israel hate is not an opinion. If you live in Germany and question the right of existence of Israel or relativize the Holocaust, will meet our resistance with all its consequences. Because there cannot be any yes, but only a never again in this situation. And I would like to also warn against having all those who are Muslims or have Muslim roots be under a general suspicion. 2 weeks ago, I was in a Jewish kindergarten in Berlin. And the educator, while we were sitting together, told the children that they cannot leave the building with the children anymore, and I cannot take public transport because there is a danger, because people see that this is a Jewish kindergarten. Now, you don't know what to say in view of such a situation. On the other hand, you read in a newspaper article that a student, a young girl, is being beaten up because she has a chain which says Allah. Now, this is everyday life, but we have to talk about it. We must not overlook it, and that's why it's very important, especially these days, that we are not only fighting anti-Muslim racism, but that standing up against anti-Muslim racism will make our democracy stronger. And this applies to our society, and I think this also goes for my colleague Mr. Landsbergis, and Mr. Di Maio from Italy is also here. He's the Commissioner for the Middle East right now. So what we feel in our European democracies right now also applies to our international relations. Here too, we have to work hard against the polarization, against the ever deeper blockages between our societies and countries. Because there are many crises we need to fight. And as we often have to act against our first impulse, which is difficult, especially in a world which is driven by the social media, or the media in general. So instead of simplifying, we should adopt the universal perspective. We have to face the complexity. We have to focus on the dilemmas. And this is the only possibility to overcome the problematic situation. And this is not only a challenge to foreign policy, it's also an important job to do in domestic policy. And this certainly applies when we are dealing with difficult partners, where there are lots of conflicts, and the first impulse is to not want to speak to the other side anymore, which also concerns the Middle East. The ceasefire, the release of the hostages, that's a little bit of light, but we have to use it. Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world, as the UNICEF had said a few days ago with reference to the children. Thus, we are trying to help the children. It seems to be simple, but they cost us days of negotiation, more water, milk powder, and medical materials. And we have to use the ceasefire also in order to talk about what could be, i.e., concrete steps for a secure future. So concrete steps into tomorrow, even if tomorrow seems to be far away. Because Israel will never be able to live in security if the terror of Hamas is not combated. And at the same time, there can only be security for Israel if the Palestinians also have prospects for the future. And this is precisely why it worries me that internationally, it's often not people, but other aspects which are in the focus. So either Israel's right to self-defense or the humanitarian suffering in Gaza. But both are a reality. And only if we deal with both, there can be peace. And this is why it's been important for me to have the talks time and again, like yesterday in Barcelona. Because you have to see the suffering of the other in order to deal and hopefully eventually end your own suffering as the foreign minister of a country for which Israel's security is a reason of state. I'm saying this. And yesterday, and whenever I've visited the Middle East, I've underlined that Israel has not only the right, but also the duty to defend itself against the terrible terrorist attack by Hamas, just like every other country in the world. And at the same time, we must make it clear to Israel that civilian casualties must be avoided at all times. That Israel cannot have an interest in more civilian casualties, more women, children, men suffering, and more grief and anger in the Arab world as a result is a matter of fact. And that this conflict will spread and be carried into the next generation is another danger, which is why I am calling on Israel to do more to prevent extremist settlers in the West Bank from exploiting the situation to drive Palestinians from their homes. Now, these talks are never easy. This is a major dilemma, but we have to face it. Otherwise, there is speechlessness. And speechlessness is the most dangerous thing right now, because we must not allow the universal view to be lost. We must not allow Hamas terror to drive a wedge between us as a global community. And the good thing is, when the mics are switched off, we see it, and then I hear it in many talks and conversation, especially in the region. Now, this is what we need to use in order to build on and in order to think about a path to a two-state solution. Not only publicly and in the big circles, but also in the small circles, there where there is trust and the possibility to see the point of the other, precisely because our country is clearly on Israel's side and enjoys the trust of Arab countries. We need to be the bridge builders. And that's a reason why I've looked at the figures. I think this is a decisive moment in the German foreign policy. It's our responsibility and our role in the world I see. And I want to be clear. We have clear principles and we will fight for these, but we also need to find ways to have the smallest steps, be efficient, and take us forward. These are the two sides of the same coin I see. This is what responsible, value-driven politics and foreign policy mean, a policy that faces up to the complexities it endures and is willing to go the small steps, even if the solution seems to be far, far away, because we know that if we do not occupy this space together with our partners, others will fill the gap and they will use other methods. Players who despise the universal view, who fight it actively, who are not interested in peace, but only in their own influence in the global society or community. What worries me is also how nefariousness seems to be spreading in our world, a willingness to break the fundamental rules of our coexistence with barbaric terror, as in the case of Hamas, with a nefarious attack on a neighbor, as in the case of Russia. There seems to be a common denominator among those players, the expectation that there is no international order in which nefariousness, in which rule breaking is sanctioned. And if this becomes an advantage, what does that mean for the willingness of other players to break fundamental rules? This is also a task I see for international European and German foreign policy, the willingness to do something about it. Not knowing whether you will be successful, but the willingness to do something, to really support and underline time and again what is the fundamental principle of our global community. The basic understanding that the law applies in our worlds, the principles of the UN Charter and the human rights for everyone, everywhere. But it also means that if we want to counter nefariousness, if we want to promote concrete solutions to our common challenges, we cannot only cooperate with partners who always share our world view 100%. We cannot draw a line and say, okay, you need to decide where you stand, in the blue or in the red field, because otherwise we won't talk to you anymore. This might also be the first impulse, seemingly simple, comfortable a solution, but it's not. And it's also too convenient to just ignore our differences when it comes to difficult partners and to not talk about the human rights. That's also the first impulse sometimes. But this doesn't help us either. And this is what I'm experiencing right now myself. So you need trust and honesty in order to build bridges. If the other players don't have the feeling that in public you tell a different story than behind closed doors. Now, this is a complexity we need to face, collaborating with different partners, not because we must it, but because we want it in order to do something about the nefariousness in the world. And there are lots of examples. I cannot give all of them, but I would like to remind you of the COP28 in Dubai, which will start in a few days. There too, we will meet countries with which we have fundamental differences. We will not keep these differences quiet, but we will also look for ways to cooperate with these countries on joint solutions, especially in these times. Concrete solutions which some might deem technical, but which can also show us that there is international cooperation by obliging all major emitters to reduce their CO2 emissions, or to have the Gulf states and China join us in providing financial resources so that vulnerable countries can better cope with the damage and losses caused by the climate crisis. Here too, there are no easy answers because different perspectives are in stark opposition, including geopolitical interests. But here too, we will fight for every single step forward. It's true that in the face of the climate crisis, we need to bear in mind that this is the greatest danger, the greatest risk we are facing these days in view of the terrible violence in the Middle East, in Ukraine. Another winter which will have us focus on infrastructure or the Sahel. You often want to just say, it's too much. You wake up in the morning and that's what you want to say. But we can't afford that. And we will not afford that, because we can only make progress in these crises if we don't get lost in confessional bubbles, but if we get up each and every morning and keep our universal perspective and keep adjusting the screws no matter how small. Because, and that's something else we see these days, sometimes we are in despair, but then we see these pictures, a boy running into the arms of his father, a father hugging his child, and we feel this is about each and every person, each and every human beings. Everyone matters who gets free from the hostage. It's also about every truck of humanitarian aid to Gaza. It's for every rocket less fired at Ukraine or Tel Aviv, because it saves life if you catch them before. And it's for every human life. It's about the safety for all of us. And this should never be too much for us. Thank you.
Minister Baerbock, thank you very much for the thought-provoking speech. I am now delighted to welcome Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis. Minister, the floor is yours.
Dear Annalena, dear ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, it's my pleasure to stand before you today at this important event held at a critical conjuncture for Lithuania, Germany, and Europe. Lithuania and Germany are bound by history. When we trace the history of Lithuania over 1,000 years back, we arrive at Quedlinburg, just 2.5 hours drive outside Berlin, where we find the first written mentioning of Lithuanian state in the town's famous annals. So one can say that our bilateral relations date back 1,000 years and more. Our history is rich in sagas, names, treaties, and events, but today I'm not here to talk about that history. Today I would like to talk about the present and the future. I will focus on three main issues: the significance of Ukraine for European security, the urgent need to invest in our own security, and the importance of German leadership. The world is in polycrisis. Russia's barbaric war in Ukraine, Hamas' attack against Israel and its people, and the war in Gaza, tensions in both South Caucasus and Western Balkans, and on top of that, the Indo-Pacific. This is not just a perfect storm type of situation. Crises emerge in different regions for different reasons and are sparked by different actors, but we cannot say that they are not related. They're all useful to those who benefit from chaos and dismantling of the conventional rules-based international order. And they all require additional attention from countries and alliances that have a deep interest in defending the rules-based order. As the world continues to heat up, with the international system increasingly fragmented, many wonder whether we will be able to manage them all amidst the distractions on multiple fronts. How many wars can we effectively fight? Will we be forced to choose, and if so, which ones will we choose? The outcome of these deliberations will directly affect Lithuania's interests, and perhaps even our survival. As in a period of interconnected conflicts, a display of weakness in one crisis triggers a chain reaction in another part of the world. I would argue that someday, when historians look back on these times, Russia's aggression and the West's reaction to it might be an inflection point. While it has not been the starting point, but it certainly has been a pivotal moment that will shape the course of global events for decades to come. Yet this is not history yet. It is our present, which we will still have the opportunity and duty to shape. We need to be brutally honest and aware that Russia is at war with the West. Though geographically contained in Ukraine and fought by Ukrainians, it is our war. If Ukraine loses, we all lose, with all the consequences that it entails. If Ukraine wins, let us try to imagine for just 1 second what kind of opportunities that will create from Belarus to South Caucasus, from Western Balkans to Africa. To say that Ukraine is defending its statehood, but also the borders of Poland, Baltic states, and thus the security of Europe, is not a figurative expression. Unfortunately, almost 2 years into the war, we already start seeing signs of fatigue in some countries. New crises and conflicts are starting to push Ukraine off the list of political priorities. Yet the war fatigue is a phenomenon of societies living in peace. For Ukraine, giving in to fatigue would mean ceasing to exist, which means that we cannot give in either. In the West, we certainly have the resources to ensure Ukraine's victory. The only thing lacking is the courage to acknowledge that this is not just Russia's war against Ukraine. Rather, it is a battle against the Western world and democracy that Putin is waging alongside accomplices who seek global instability. To acknowledge that as long as Russia retains the initiative, it will continue escalating just because it can. Russia had time to successfully recover from the initial shock when the Blitzkrieg failed, switched to the mode of 24/7 wartime economy, and while with certain delays, is on track to achieve a major strengthening of its armed forces in the western direction, just across our borders. Ukraine can effectively defend, fight, and win if we provide sufficient and timely support. More ammunition, more air defense, more long-range missiles for Ukraine, and continuous flow of support is our responsibility. Allowing Russia to freeze a conflict on Ukrainian territory would open a constant source of tension and instability and give Russia more time to prepare. Ukraine's victory is of existential significance, not only for Lithuania and Germany, but I would argue for the whole democratic world. And that is why also Ukraine's integration into NATO and EU must also be our overriding objective and highest priority. If we want to deter future aggressions, there is no alternative to providing Ukraine the ultimate security guarantees, the membership in these organizations. The enlargement to the east was a success story. Let us try to think for a moment what would staying outside NATO and EU for the Baltic states and Poland with imperialist Russia emboldened? How different would Germany's security picture would look like today? The key lessons from Lithuania's success story is that you cannot shape a positive change while remaining a passive observer or defining your strategy by things you cannot or would not do. And just like 20 years ago, when the West took a courageous step, we can repeat that success story. We should seize the historic opportunity already this December by launching accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. Strategic decisions are only possible if there is enough muscle behind them. Since the start of Russia's invasion, Europe has consolidated military support for Ukraine, both nationally and via the European Peace Facility, allowing the European collective military support to nearly match that of US. The geopolitical union is finally emerging. At the very critical time, the EU is proving again its ability to adapt and deepen integration and rise to the challenge. Russia's barbaric war against Ukraine and NATO's defense planning have also revealed the dramatic lack of military capabilities in Europe. We need to produce more ammunition, more air defense systems, invest in our cyber defense, military mobility and logistics, and support our defense industries. The only way out is via increasing defense spending significantly and creating new mechanisms to strengthen our defense industries. Spending 2% on defense is already old news. To catch up for years of underinvestment, we need to spend more, and quickly. Unfortunately, if 2% is the floor, some of us are still in the basement. During the Cold War, spending 3–4% on defense was not an issue. Today, the security situation is more volatile. The war is already raging, and the risk of direct military conflict in the time span of several years is there. Are we ready for that? Our societies got used to the comfort of peaceful times and continuous economic growth. Public disengagement from defense matters is dangerously high. Yet for every society in danger, the foundation of the Maslow pyramids remains the same: security and defense interests. It is up to us politicians to explain to our societies that Europe is no longer at peace. Today, Germany's leadership in Europe is more important than ever. For Lithuania, Germany's decision to permanently deploy a heavy brigade in Lithuania is a genuine symbol of Zeitenwende. A fresh breath of good news in times of trouble. It will be by far the largest NATO presence on the eastern flank and will significantly strengthen deterrence and defense posture in our region. An example to follow by other allies. We're extremely grateful to Germany for standing with us. This will not only be a fundamental change, increasing security, but also an opportunity to reach a new qualitative level of partnership with Germany. Germany is becoming the European strategic pillar of Lithuania's security. We have all the right tools to protect our way of life, now and in the future. All we need is honest acknowledgement of risks associated to global reconfiguration taking place in front of our eyes, and a will to defend it, our way of life. Thank you.
Now, we welcome both of the ministers for a moderated discussion here on stage. If I may ask you to come back on stage, ministers. And the discussion will be hosted by Tina Hassel, Editor-in-Chief of the ARD Capital Studio.
Well, thank you very much for the interesting opening remarks. Unfortunately, we have to shorten our panel discussion a little bit because Foreign Minister Baerbock has to leave very, very soon, and we have the pleasure to wait a little longer because we are in special times, we just start right away, rush a little bit, and then can deepen our topics and thoughts later after this. So I may start with you, Minister Baerbock, and you both were talking about poly crisis and the temptation to turn away and say this is enough. So let me quickly start with the Körber-Stiftung survey, which was already mentioned. So even in those times, we are 54% of Germans think Germany should restrain more, and only 38% of Germans want that Germany is more engaged. So what are we waiting for? Is the glass half empty or half full? And are Germans not used in taking the lead more than this?
For me, the glass is always half full. Otherwise, I believe I would step down from politics. So if you do not believe that you can make a difference, I think all your spirit is being gone. So obviously, this is not the majority thinking that we have to engage more. However, anyhow, this is my problem with polls, yeah. If you argue with people, so what would be the consequence, yeah? Germany would not engage any further, and then the question would be, leaving alone Lithuania in case they are being threatened by Russia. Should Germany restrain? I bet the answers would be different. And this is why, and I always have to be very careful with English answers on these questions, but I said back in time already with regard to don't be driven by polls. Yeah, I'm not using voters right now, but I think the tendency, and this is what I try to say also in my speech, there's a high tendency in these times when we see many democracies, unfortunately also passed in Italy, now in the Netherlands, early elections, like really stressed, emotional societies, that politicians do not dare anymore to also address the difficult topics, to stand for a position, saying we have to go this way because otherwise. And this is why I'm arguing with so much verve and also with always the glass being half full of saying, yes, we do have to engage more in international crises. Germany benefited from the support of others, from our Eastern European friends, from the Americans, for our own reunification, for the European Union. And so I deeply believe now it's time for us as German politics, as German foreign policy, as the biggest country in the European Union, to make it possible that Europe can also play in this geopolitical polycrisis in a world a role, and that we, as one of the strongest countries in the European Union, take the responsibilities others have taken for us back in time, also with regard to security, and this means also bringing a brigade to Lithuania. This means engaging heavily in the support of Ukraine, and this means also now in these times of the Middle East, to not just say we cannot do anything because there's a big storm also in our own society, but doing the things where we believe that we can help to bring peace at one day also to the Middle East.
Minister Landsbergis, you just said that a display of weakness in one of the crises triggers a chain reaction in another part of the world. So do you think that the West, putting it that way, has still enough hard power, and what exactly do you expect would you like Germany to do in this polycrisis? Not only concentrated on the brigade that you mentioned already.
Well, I think that we're definitely being watched. That is for sure. We're being watched by non-democratic actors, by those who been mired in the crisis of their own for decades or even longer than that. And now they're trying to answer the question, how would we answer if they would start a crisis? Whether that would be a right time for them to fix a border here and there, to solve a minority solution that they've had for decades. Because the feeling is in the air that what we call the rules-based international order is crumbling, or at least it's weaker than it was before. And the guardians of that order are preoccupied elsewhere. And this might be the right time to do something about this. And this is what worries us, really, that we cannot expect now that we are just going back to the business as usual tomorrow or day after. That this is a long period, and it all starts in Ukraine. And this is how it looks, because if we were to be able to help Ukraine win, restore the order, that would send a very strong signal that this is not the way to go. Even Russia was stopped. You know, even a permanent Security Council member was stopped in Ukraine because of a coordinated effort. So you shouldn't try that elsewhere. If we are unable to do that, I'm worried that we are opening a gates for instability for quite a while.
Minister Baerbock, Germany is in the midst of a severe budget crisis. This is why you have to leave, as well as the Chancellor is holding a very important unexpected speech. But can you guarantee that even in this budget crisis, Germany will remain a reliable partner? And to put it a little bit more concrete, can you guarantee, for example, the promise will be kept that Germany is doubling the aid for Ukraine from 4 to 8 billion. So what can you tell us right now on that?
Yes, and the defense minister and I have made that very clear also in the last days, that we will not cut on the support for Ukraine, because as my colleague has said, this is not only a question with regarding the support of Ukraine, this is a question of our own security. But I want to be very frank and open as well. I believe this is a responsibility for everybody in our country. We are in a time, and poly-crisis sounds so technical and therefore nice. We are in a time where there is a fight between the situation where the world is going in the future. Are we keeping up a world with a rules-based international order, or are we going to a world where there's only the strength of the mighty? And this is a question where we are standing, and we are also standing in a situation where we see liberal democracies versus autocracies. And while I've been in the Middle East discussing about how we can build bridges for the future, I hear arguments like, but you have to understand our other Arab neighbor because they do have a parliament, and for them it's a bit more tricky in this kind of situation to stand with Israel. I mean, think about this sentence again. Yeah, the argumentation that it's more problematic of having a parliament with different views to take the right decision. And then I was always afraid about this constitutional ruling. And I was thinking, oh my God, please, not receiving an SMS from somebody. Well, you know, we do have some reasons why we do not have constitutional courts. You know, not only we respect the constitutional court, but this is a base for our democracy, the separation of power. But I'm naming these arguments because I'm hearing them the whole time. So we have to show, especially in these times, that democracies are capable of dealing with these crises. We saw it in Corona, where we had also here a tendency, the call for the strong man who is solving now the Corona crisis. And in the end, people could see that obviously democracies had left this because we work together also in the European Union. We showed it in Russia's brutal war against Ukraine. We showed that Europe was capable from one day to the other because also Germany changed their position on supporting Ukraine. And now we have to show it again. We have to show that in a world with multiple crises, we are capable as a democracy to answer and face these crises, putting up priorities, keeping up our support for Ukraine, having a discussion now, a lively discussion in a strong parliament, showing that everybody takes up their responsibility of finding solutions and not only talking about problems. And then we unfortunately haven't solved the world, but we are hopefully showing till the end of the year that we are not only discussing problems, but we can give answers internationally, but also for the people in our own countries.
Thank you very much for the first part of that lively discussion, because I'm already received signs that you have to leave the stage.
Because it would be very bad if the headline would be the foreign minister wasn't there, so maybe there's a lack of support, and this is why I'm running now. Thank you very much, and we see each other at NATO in Brussels. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. You both are traveling to NATO together, and we are... Thank you. And I'm very delighted that we can dig a little deeper and continue the discussion. Minister Baerbock just mentioned the Middle East and the fight against, or the global fight for a rule-based order. Do you see, Minister, the risk that the world, this front could be harmed or fading away, the unity? Because some of the BRICS and some of the Arab countries now say, look, you are you're practicing double standards during this conflict compared to the Russian aggression and Ukraine. Do you see that risk? And what can we do against it?
I think that Minister Baerbock very clearly navigated and showed the path that Europe is taking, where we have rules of law approach as our guiding line. And in many cases, it might not be an easy or popular or liked by any side, but this is the path that Europe should take. Acknowledging the right and affirming the right of each country to defend itself from terrorist attacks. That's a paramount thing, wherever the country is. We've been in the situations in the past, and unfortunately I think that we will be in the future, where we will have to support ourselves, our partners, in the eyes of brutal attacks that are still happening, and the actors are still out there. But looking into the future, as Minister Baerbock said, we need to find a stable solution for Middle East that would be based on internationally agreed rules and norms. There's no other way around it. And the problem might be that this proposal, as I said, might find criticism from, on one side, from Arab countries, on the other side, might be Israel. But I think that this is the path that we should be walking, because that's the only way how can we avoid the situation of double standards.
But the vote in the UN was completely different than the votes on Ukraine before. So you are, or we are, the West, the rule-based order, is losing some important states that were aligned before. So what can we do against this?
Well, the situations are, I would say that the situation with Russia's barbaric war against Ukraine is a new phenomenon in UN. So the coalitions were being formed as we went through them, while the Middle East the situation has a very long history.
Absolutely.
And the countries have been voting for a very long time, quite similarly. So I would not suspect that at this stage it would affect. I think that, yeah, unfortunately, Europe was not able to formulate a single solution. We formulated 3 solutions in UN, but I think that there is a common ground for everybody who voted.
Coming back to Europe and to the support of Ukraine, Ukraine is facing a cold winter, maybe with even more brutal attacks on infrastructure and everything. And you were talking about a kind of fatigue in your speech, and you were talking that Ukraine problem and the war against Ukraine is a little bit pushed back at the priority of the international affairs. So what should be done as today in the upcoming days and weeks? What do you expect from Germany? More than, we are lacking munition. You talked about long range air and about air defense. So what are you expecting from Germany and from Europe?
If going a step back, I think that the most dangerous thing, and I mentioned that in my intervention, was that if we still are not allowing the thought that this war is about us, but not in a value description, like, we fight because it's right, because it's a righteous war, but strategically, that this affects us. Russia is trying to undermine the West. that would mean that if Ukraine is unable to withstand, it will be our loss.
But you saw the votes, the last election results in Europe. You saw Fidesz, you saw the vote in the Netherlands. Hopefully there will be no government under the front runner and who won the election, but they are all more linked and close to Russia. They want to stop arms delivery, so the trend is probably against those who are standing.
But I don't think that we're open enough. I don't think that we are candid enough about what's really going on. Maybe due to the fear of escalation or imaginary escalation, you know, we kind of try to, in many cases, we try to portray this as regional, you know, still far away geographically, issue that might not affect us all. This is a major policy issue that should drive the debate. You know, as a person who is interested in history, what I'm fearing is that we're waiting for Pearl Harbor to happen. You know, we passed all the stages already, and we're like, you know, Pearl Harbor has not happened, so we're fine. We're not fine. We're not fine. It's already out there. You know, it's just a question when the really, really hard decisions will need to be made. The question is whether we're ready for them. So we're waltzing around, you know, the uncomfortable question. And, you know, going back to the previous question, what can be done and why it is so difficult to do is because we still don't believe that it's about us. You know, if you were sure and your electorate was sure that this is already Pearl Harbor is happening, you would send everything that you have in order for it really not to happen, to defend yourself, to defend Berlin, to defend Vilnius, to defend the borders, and in extension to defend Kiev, the same way that you would defend your own country. So I think that we're not there yet. I'm hoping that we will arrive there in time.
For Lithuania, foreign policy is always about security policy as well. For sure, that's why you are so clear about what you said. You mentioned already the decision of Germany to really send the largest NATO presence in the eastern flank by sending on a permanent basis the brigade. But still, is it coming early enough? Your president had been here recently and he asked for maybe stepping up a little time-wise. So what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think that it is, I'm not sure how it's completely seen in Germany, but in Lithuania it's a strategic decision. It's a strategic change. And to give you an example, so it was a year before we joined NATO. President Bush arrived to Lithuania, and he gave a speech to a huge crowd. Tens of thousands of people gathered in one of the main squares of Lithuania, in Vilnius. And he said, whoever would choose Lithuania as their enemy would choose United States as their enemy as well. And this became a plaque. Now it's a plaque on our town hall in the center of the city. And it forms the basis of our strategic relationship with the United States and Lithuania, so that people would walk through, you see the phrase, and it's in everybody's mind. You could ask school children in the school, and they would probably give you almost the right quote. And I think that the German decision to send brigade should also find itself on the town hall. Because it's that important. It forms a strategic relationship between our two countries. And I wish that it was understood in Germany as well, that the step that your government, that you've made and that you supported is strategic. It's one of the most important decisions made in this century security-wise. That is how important it is.
Thank you. I think it's a very good closing remarks. We should do this, and we should continue what you said, not hiding it, but really openly engaging all those very crucial discussions, because we are at a crossroad, and crossroad, and it's important what we do now will have huge consequences for the future. Thank you very much to the audience. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time for questions. We had to rush a little. You will travel with Minister Baerbock in the same plane then to Brussels. You can continue your discussion. You will continue here. The panel discussions, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.